So today, guys, so we're done. That's the end of the objective portion of the test. Now we move on to the essay. Tomorrow in class, you guys are going to have time to work on roots of our rights on page 20. Yes. In groups or individually, you can have time to work on that tomorrow with Coach Holman. Monday, come in, have that chart filled out. I'll look at it, grade it, and put points in. We'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll move on to where we pick up from today. Okay. So the second paragraph in your essay, first one's over the roots of your rights and the influence of the English constitutions on our government. Okay. And then the next thing you'll be talking about in your essay is, let me get it right for you, it's kind of your learning intention today. Okay, so the influence of colonial governments on our system. Okay, so colonial era. Colonial era. Okay. With this, guys, what you think about it this way? So we talked, I think I brought this up yesterday, the first permanent colony in the New World? Jamestown. What year was that? 1607, right? And where's Jamestown? What colony? Virginia, okay? And then 13 years, Plymouth Rock. Okay, that was your Puritans. Okay, escaping religious persecution. Okay, Plymouth Rock is in what colony? Massachusetts. Okay, so guys, over time you're going to get 13 of these, right? Now, do you remember from last year or middle school even? There were 3 types of colonies. Royal colonies, and that's going to be the first one we talk about. I'll put the other 2 up as we go through it. Hi. How's it going? All right. Okay, all of them had to have charters, right? So but for different purposes. So there was a charter King gave for just to have a colony and named after him, and this colony, a little bit of mercantilism, and then other ones he set up charters for that had a different feel to them. Companies, right? So businesses, yes? What do we call these? You could call them joint stock companies, but the word I'm going to use is proprietary. Proprietary company, okay? And then the third type were like Massachusetts. They were independent, okay, with very little royal influence. Okay, they were just people that were allowed to establish colonies. Okay, so we're going to break down each one of these and look at the impact of these different colonies, because each ones are going to form their own government. Okay, and so those colonial governments, we're going to use a lot of the traditions that we found from these in our government today. Follow me? And that's just what you're going to write about on your essay. Okay, so royal colonies had 3 branches. Okay, 3 branches. Now, who's the head of a colony? Like, who's the head of the state of Kansas? The governor. Okay, so the governor is appointed by the king. The judges appointed by the king. The legislature was bicameral. You had the upper house appointed by the king. The lower house was not appointed by the king. Who made up the lower house? Kind of people. Property owners. Okay, we're going to classify that even more. White male property owners. Okay? They were elected to the lower house. Now, what's important here, guys, everything's run by the king, appointed by the king, except for this lower house, which is going to be the wealthy, right? These people are going to be wealthy, landowners, property taxes, and all that, okay? And so the power they were given under these royal governments was control of the purse. They controlled the money. I mean, where do these colonies get money anyway? Taxes, right? Who's going to be taxed the most in Massachusetts or in Virginia? Where are you going to get your tax base? These people. I mean, they're the ones with money, right? Your white male, property owners. They own farms and plantations and so forth, right? So they're making money. They need to pay the taxes, and then they pay the taxes. They set their own taxes, and then they control how the money is spent. That's a lot of power, right? So there is royal influence here, okay? But where the rubber meets the road, the people of the colony control it. Now, do these white male property owners, are they looking out for the best interest of everybody in the colony, or are they looking out for their own selves? Yeah, okay. And that's the way it was back in England. So if you go back to England, Parliament develops over time. Okay, so originally you got the king, right? Well, he's got some very influential people around him, like, bishops, okay? Powerful, wealthy aristocrats, landowners, dukes, earls, these types of folks. They advise the king. That's how Parliament kind of begins. Are they looking out for the general interest of the people or themselves? They're looking out for themselves, okay? Over time, that will transition, okay? Now, there were only 3 royal colonies to begin with, okay? New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. Now, as time goes on, as you guys know, there's a rebellion. And there's some very unhappy people in the New World, right? So when the rebellion starts and people start to protest against the crown, they're going to clamp down. And they're going to make several colonies that are not royal colonies, they're going to make them royal colonies. Where the king says, no more of this. I'm appointing your governor. You follow me? So, with rebellion, this list is going to grow. Okay? This list will grow to include New Hampshire, Massachusetts, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So, Massachusetts, which we'll talk about in a minute, they're used to electing their own governor. Because they're an independent colony. And the king's going to say, no, not anymore. You're being advised by dishonorable men. I will put somebody honorable in. Good? All right, now. This right here, guys, we use today. So in the U.S. Congress today, we have a bicameral legislature, House of Representatives, and the Senate. Don't know if you knew this or not, but any time the U.S. government is going to tax you or spend your money, that legislation must begin in the House of Representatives. So, if Joe Biden wants some money to spend, he's got to go through Kevin McCarthy. Do you understand? Not Chuck Schumer of the Senate, because Schumer doesn't, the Senate doesn't control money. The House does. This is the people's house. This is the house that is closest to the people. This is a tradition that we use to this day that began right here. That's what you want to write about on the test. That's the influence right there, right? This isn't. I mean, three branches is an influence. We have that too. Okay, so that's what you're looking for, these influences. Okay. All right, good. So let's move over to proprietary colonies. You guys take business principles? I taught business law last year. I don't know if you guys knew that. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. You guys know I have a business degree for my first time around in college. Guys, I've spent more time in college. It's ridiculous. If you added up the number of hours I have, and I don't, I'm sure I don't really come off as the academic type, but I am. Okay. So proprietor is a business owner. Okay. So proprietorship is a business usually with one person. Okay. You could have a partnership, which would be proprietorship with two people. If you start a small business, like your lights thing, did you set up an S corporation? Okay, you should probably set up an S corporation, because say there's a short in one of the Christmas lights and you burn down somebody's house.
Yeah.
They can't come up after your assets. They come after the corporation. So you set up it's easy to set up. Okay. You set up an S corporation. The corporation has the liability. Okay. Not the individual. If you set up a sole proprietorship, then you have the liability. Any of you, if you're thinking about starting a business, okay, S corporation, all right, and then you pay yourself. The corporation pays you, okay, and you own all the stock. And you can even have little stock certificates made up, okay, like issue yourself 100 shares and you own all the shares. It's kind of fun. My dad did that. We had a company called eBright Enterprises, okay, LLC, yeah, and then Perdido Publishing. Ran a small business called Perdido Publishing, a little S corp. And what happens is, guys, if you borrow money, if the corporation borrows money and you can't pay it back, well, they go after the corporation, not you. So you just shut your doors. And you're like, I'm sorry, I can't pay my bills. We're going out of business. No liability for you. Okay. All right, no more business today. Okay, well, this is business, all right? So we know some of the names of these proprietors, like William Penn, Pennsylvania, Lord Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, there was a guy named James Oglethorpe, which was Georgia. Okay. So these, this is where the king gives a charter to an individual who is the proprietor, and so the proprietor that doesn't look like. I don't think I need an I, do I?
No.
It's T-O-R, right? Proprietor, yeah. Okay. Who's the proprietor? The proprietor is the governor. Okay. Now, I'm sure you guys touched on this a little bit sometime in your history career. that some of these colonies were known, like Georgia was known as what kind of colony? Besides it being a proprietorship or a,
Agriculture.
there was that.
That
They needed people to work there. Like they needed labor. So like a debtor's prison, like people that were in prison for debt could come there, work off their debt, or criminals. Georgia's known for that. In reality, guys, Maryland actually had more of these indentured servants, if you will, than Georgia did. Okay, as far as like it being a penal colony. And a lot of them, guys, were Catholic. A lot of them were Irish. Okay, this is some really interesting history for you guys as Catholics. Okay, because the first Catholics to come here were mostly indentured. Okay, they were Irish, and they were mistreated as indentured servants. Okay, some of them could work off their debt and then live there. For a time, guys, Catholics were allowed to worship in places like Maryland without any real restrictions. And then there were restrictions where Catholics were really abused, okay, as far as religious freedom goes. But one of the most famous Catholics during this era of the colonial era is Charles Carroll. Okay, he's the only Catholic that signed the Declaration of Independence. Now, I borrowed this book from Father Eric Weldon a few years ago. It's called American Cicero. It's about Charles Carroll and his father. Now, his father was Irish. They think he was likely the wealthiest man in the colonies, Charles Carroll, the Catholic. Okay. What's interesting about Charles, he married a Marylander, okay, woman, and she was very tied to society. Like her family was very, influential, okay? And so that allowed Charles to kind of move in circles, the political circles, the business circles, and he had a lot of money, okay? But what also really helped him was this. Charles Carroll was educated at Oxford in England, okay, getting the Protestant type education, but he was also educated in Paris. So he had kind of both the classical, because your Paris education is more of a classical education, okay? And then you had your Anglican education. So he knew both sides of this, okay? And so he was allowed to be a member of the Second Continental Congress, guys. That meant he was in the room when they were writing the Declaration of Independence, okay? And he voted for it, okay? And so he went on to have pretty illustrious life in the New World. Now, he reminds you a lot of the patriarch of the Kennedy clan. Who's the father of the Kennedy clan? Joe Kennedy, okay? Now, Joe Kennedy, being a Catholic, went to Harvard, okay? He was one of very few Catholics that would attend Harvard, okay? Guys, these private schools, William and Mary, Harvard, even, what Jefferson built was University of Virginia. These guys were all religious schools, you understand. They very religious schools. And so the fact that even into the 30s, 40s, 50s of the 1900s. And so when Joe Kennedy was there as a Catholic, he was really ostracized, guys. I mean, he was picked on, they looked down on him, and he used that as fuel. You understand? You know what I mean? You're not going to treat me like this, type of thing. And it really drove him. He became very wealthy. A lot of it was through the stock market. He got out before it crashed. He also made a lot of money in prohibition. Okay, Joe Kennedy. Now, he was bound and determined that one of his sons would become president of the United States. This was on purpose, you understand. Now, Joe Kennedy wanted his eldest son to be president. His eldest son was fantastic athlete, superstar, super bright, okay? And when World War II started, this is a great way to move yourself up politically, is to serve in the military, right? He becomes a pilot, okay? Everything's working out. Like, he's going to have the resume. Then his plane crashes in World War II, and the eldest Kennedy son dies, okay? And it falls on Jack, or John F. Kennedy, who also served in World War II in the Pacific and was wounded. Actually suffered severe back wounds, okay, and suffered from those the remainder of his life. In fact, he was addicted to painkillers because of his back pain was so bad, okay. But John F. Kennedy, guys, he was the sickly kid, the one that was kind of weak and skinny and just was sick a lot. And he wasn't like his older brother. Let's just put it that way, okay? But it fell on him. And so Joe poured everything he could into John F. Kennedy, or Jack Kennedy, as they called him. And really, his path was cleared for him. Like, okay, you're going to run for Congress, okay? You're going to run for the Senate, and you're going to run for president, okay? And he was groomed, and he made it. You know what I mean? So just a little bit of Catholic history in here. If you read about Charles Carroll, really interesting history here. But I like the fact, I'm glad that the other, Protestants, let him be part of it, because he was well qualified. He was a really smart guy, okay, Charles Carroll, and his father and so forth, okay. So, sorry, just, as a teacher, you're supposed to infuse Catholicism into your classes, right? Okay. I think I did that yesterday. I think I've done that today. Okay, so I'm done preaching. All right, let's move on. A little more history with these proprietaries. 3 branches, okay? And you also have the judges picked by the king, upper house, king, lower house, again, white male property owners. Okay, so the governor here of these proprietary colonies is really reliant on these businessmen, okay, because they're going to pay his salary. They pay his salary. Now that's influence. That's a lot of power, okay? How long do you think it takes to sail from London to New York in, say, 1700? Well, there will be some days. Weeks. Like 6 weeks. Okay? The Atlantic Ocean is pretty big. And depending on the winds and so forth, right? 6 weeks. So in order for the king to get a message to the governor to respond to that and get that message back to the king, you could be looking at 2.5, 3 months. Okay, it's not like picking up the phone or sending an email. Okay, so the king has to trust these governors, and these governors are trusting the citizens. Right? Okay. The king can't micromanage the colonies. It's not possible. Okay, they're too far away. All right, so the third type of colony. Oh, I didn't tell you which ones were proprietary. Just rewrite. Which ones were proprietary? We know Maryland and Pennsylvania, we already talked about those, right? Delaware, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia are proprietary colonies. So there's some really interesting history here, okay? But the best history here comes with the third kind. That's your independent colonies, okay? Those include Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and of course, Massachusetts. These colonies developed without much royal interference at all. Okay, you guys, everybody knows Kansas just had its birthday? It was 165th birthday or something like that on the 29th. Sure. Kansas's birthday.
I guess. Yep.
January 29th, I think. Okay. What's the state motto of Kansas?
Stripper ass, bro.
Which means?
Through the stars.
To the stars.
Stars.
Yeah. Anybody know what New Hampshire's is? They have the best state motto of them all, in my opinion.
Get away.
Live free or die. Okay, that's their state motto. It dates back to these times. Okay, so these independent colonies elected their own governors. Who are they elected by? White male property owners, right? Judges elected. Legislatures elected. These were self-governing. Okay? They made their own laws. They made their own decisions. And they liked it. So if you were in that first group that settled in Jamestown in 1607, and you survived, which many did. Remember Captain John Smith, right? Talked about him the other day. I think he came up trying to figure out Adam Smith, and we said John Smith. Right. Captain John Smith said this: if you don't work, you don't eat. There's no free lunch. No such thing as a free lunch. Because that first year or two, like, they were struggling. Like, you know what I mean? And it was a commune. Like, it was communist. Like, they all shared everything. Then some people got lazy. And Captain John Smith said, no, we're not doing the same. If you don't work, you don't eat. So everybody works. Okay? And the ones that survived, some of them had children. Those children that were born in Virginia, what do we call them? They're Americans. Most of the founders of this country were born here. You understand? George Washington was born here. He wanted more than anything, guys, to be a British officer. He really wanted to be part of the British Army. But he couldn't, because he wasn't British. He was American. George Washington resented that. You understand? Many, they're treated as second-class citizens. These people grew from the early 1600s to the middle of the 1700s, for about 150 years, governing themselves, growing, prospering, building. And they were proud of what they had built. These were Americans. Yes, British subjects, but Americans. There was pride in that, and they liked it. Now, over time, guys, things are going to change, okay? But it is in these colonies where the ideas of revolution begin, okay? The ideas of independence begin. Because, well, they liked this idea. Self-rule, self-rule, self-rule. Okay? All right. So you got a little bit of something to write about on the test there, on the essay, okay? Then we move directions a little bit forward. We're going to go into the next section, okay? And this will be a brief review of the Revolutionary Era. Which is always fun. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this from history. The British and the French didn't like each other. In fact, during that time between 1607 and 1760, they fought 4 world wars. The British and the French. They were fighting over here in the New World and fighting in Europe. That's a world war. Queen Anne's War, King William's War, King George's War, and the 4th, not least, the 7 Years' War, or otherwise known as the French and Indian War. Remember this? Okay. The French and Indian War. Okay. The French and Indian War goes from 1754 to 1761. My count, that's 7 years. Okay? So, from 1607 to 1761, historians have a name for this era. Okay? It's called the era of salutary neglect. So as I was just mentioning, guys, the king can't micromanage the colonies. It's too hard. You're too far away. So during this time period, they're generally left to their own devices. Self-rule, yes, the royal colonies and proprietary colonies have royal influence. But generally, they're neglected. And like it. Okay? But this war, this French and Indian War, is going to cause some problems. Now, a little side story here for you. Okay. My kids went to Central Christian Academy for elementary and middle school. And when I used to go to conferences for my kids, I'd meet with the teachers, their kids, and they had an awesome history teacher, Mrs. Turner. Okay, so I'm a history teacher. I'm going to parent-teacher conferences, talk to the history teacher. Okay, and she taught the French and Indian War like a lot. She went into a lot of detail on it, and they did little projects on it and stuff like that. So we get talking, She goes, "Yeah, I was in Canada a few weeks ago, and I was talking to this guy. He said, 'What'd you do?' I said, 'Well, I'm a history teacher.' And she said, 'Yeah, I just got done teaching the French and Indian War.' And he's like, this Canadian she's talking to, he's like, 'What'd you say?' I said, 'The French and Indian War?' He goes, 'I'm sorry, we don't use that word here. Indian, right? And we've tried to get it out of our lexicon a little bit, right? So you say Native Americans, right? Not Indians, right? You with me? The PC thing, right? So in Canada, they don't use that word. Like, it's politically incorrect, for sure, okay? In fact, they don't call it 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. In Canada, they call this war the war. The war. Okay? Because a lot of it was fought in Canada. Okay? And it's a great war to study, guys, because you have the British Army, and they're going to send about 20,000 troops over here, okay, and their Navy, which is the best in the world, against the French, okay? You got like Fort Ticonderoga, Fort Duquesne, which is Pittsburgh, right? Three Rivers, like Ticonderoga. It's crazy. So you got the U.S. militia, the militias from the different colonies fighting alongside the British. Like, we're fighting with them, and we have some Native American tribes on our side. And then the French, they have more Native American tribes because they like the French more than they like us, right? But we did have some Native American tribes on our side. So the name French and Indian War doesn't really, I don't know. But anyhow, it's like the War of 1812. It doesn't really make sense. You know what I mean? It was 1812 to 1850. Why do we call it the War of 1812? You know what I mean? I don't know. You got any other wars like that? Spanish-American War? Cuba, Philippines? No. Okay. Okay. What was I saying? Yeah. So no, like, guys, our militias fought really good. Like, and at the end of the French and Indian War, guys, in 1761, they took Fort Ticonderoga. They took like what was that other? It was like an island in Nova Scotia, Phillipsburg, or something like that. And then the British like gave it all back to the French. Like, after our militias had been up there, fought and won, and then they just gave it back. Like, what are we doing? Why did we go up there and fight when you're just going to give it back? But our militias, like, we know how to fight. Now, in reality, we fought really well when we had the British by our sides. Okay? When we were on our own, not as much, okay? Kind of like, you look at the Iraqis, or the Afghans, and they had American air power by their sides. They were pretty good. Once we left, not so good, okay? All right, sorry, I'm moving on. So, this is important, right? You want to mention this in your essay, okay? It's just that idea of self-rule, self-governance for so long. You know what I mean? So what happens? We need to talk about it, right? So you guys know how the war started, the French and Indian War started? You know who we blame for that, right? Yeah. Yeah, the father of our country, George Washington, okay? We blame him. You know, his other job besides being an officer, he was not a British officer, right? He was a colonel, actually, but not with the British, of the militia, Virginia militia. Okay, stop. And moving on, he was a surveyor, right? He surveyed. You guys heard, I don't know if you ever heard of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Okay, like today, if you were driving on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, it's like 6 lanes and it's filled with cars. Okay, that's the same road that like George Washington helped, they cut through the forest, through the wilderness, right? The same like path. It was a trail. Now it's a highway. But he was out in the wilderness, wasn't he, George Washington? And he was doing some surveying, and then the French were over there, and George Washington had with him some Native Americans. The chief was a guy named the Half King. Okay, so they're out I think they're out by Ohio Valley area, and they stumble across these 3 Frenchmen. How many of you guys know this story? You guys didn't have Mrs. Turner. Okay. So the ones that didn't raise their hand didn't have Mrs. Turner. So anyhow, they stumble across the street Frenchman, and the half king, like he's going to show his warriorship, like he attacks them, butchers them, scalps them, okay? And then there's some French troops in the area. They attack Washington. Washington's like, we're surrounded. Let's build a fort, right? So they're taking trees and like sticking them in the ground in a big circle, okay? This is their fort. It's called Fort what? Fort Necessity, okay? And the French just surround the fort. They're like, okay, it's raining. You can't get out. You can't get food or water in. It's just a matter of time till Washington surrenders, right? Bell not ring. Okay. So Washington doesn't speak French or write French, signs a surrender, which is actually an admission of murder of 3 French diplomats. And they tell him, take this back to General Braddock. So Washington, with his tail between his legs, goes back to Virginia and shows Braddock. And Braddock's like, do you realize what you just signed? You just signed an admission of guilt to murder of 3 French diplomats. Are you nuts? And then the war's on. Okay. Thanks, George Washington. All right. Now he fought lines, had the bullets flying through his clothing and all that. Have horses shot up from underneath him. It's destiny, man. That George Washington was destiny. God, I think God put him here. You know what I mean? He was 6'6". He was 6'6". Was he 6'3"?
It's still super tall for back then.
The average height was 5'7". Might have been 6'3", but it felt like 6'6". Okay. Hey, we'll pick up from there on Monday. You guys good for tomorrow, right?
So he showed up to the Continental Congress 6'6", wearing his military